Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm sharing 26 of my favorite Halloween decor DIYs that I've done so far here on my channel. Keep in mind that they are labeled a little bit out of order since this is a combination of multiple videos. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you do, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it. Now let's go ahead and get right into it. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be creating some wooden pumpkins using these 3 pieces of scrap wood. 2 of the pieces are a little bit shorter than the other one because I did want to make 3 different sizes. I'm painting all 3 of these pieces with my folk art matte acrylic paint in the color Pueblo. And then once the paint was dry, I went in with the folk art chalk paint in the color Espresso, and I just started distressing. I went around all of the edges first, and then I just kind of used my finger to smear the paint a little bit. And then once I had the edges done, I used a little bit of paint that was left over on my brush and just dry brushed that over all of the front and side edges. Now that I have all of the pieces distressed, I am ready to use my stencils. I'm using 3 different pumpkin, like scary face stencils that you can see here. These ones are from Amazon, and I will have a link to them down in the description box. I'm using the longer piece of wood here first with the longer faced pumpkin, and I'm just making sure to secure the stencil with some painter's tape at the top and bottom. Then the color I'm using to paint the face is from Folk Art, and it is the rich black colored chalk paint. Once it was all dry, I then removed the stencil, and I did pretty much the same thing for the next 2, only my stencil was a little bit too long for my piece of wood, so I just cut the stencil down a little bit so that I was still able to use the painter's tape to hold it into place. And then I did the same steps with the other one. I just used that same rich black chalk paint to paint over the pumpkin face. For the stems of my pumpkins, I'm going to be using these 3 small pieces of birch wood. These are from Dollar Tree, and I'm just using some hot glue to attach the stems to the top of my pumpkins. And then I did think that they were a little bit light in color, so I used some of that espresso colored paint, and I just very lightly painted that over the stems just to give them a little bit of a darker, more distressed look. To add some detail to my pumpkins, I'm using some of this raffia, also from Dollar Tree, and I'm just tying it around the stem of my pumpkin. And then I'm going to be using some more raffia to create a really small bow. Once I have my bow made, I'm then just going to be using some hot glue to attach it right in the front center of my pumpkin, and I did cut down the raffia quite a bit so that the strands on my bow were not super long. And then I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood buttons. This one is a little bit smaller, and I am just going to be painting it with that espresso colored chalk paint. I'm then using hot glue to attach that button right in the center of my bow, and I did end up cutting the rest of the raffia at the top of the pumpkin down quite a bit. And then I wanted to add one little extra detail, which was one of these unfinished wood buttons right in the center of the other button. Here are my wooden pumpkins all finished. These are so cute. They were super easy to create, and they cost me way less than if I were to buy ones like this in store. Now moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm going to be starting with this unfinished wooden blank from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm doing is painting 2 of the wooden slats with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. It is the 2nd and then the 4th slat that you can see here. Then once I have those painted, I went ahead and painted the entire frame of this piece with that same rich black color. Then for the remaining 2 slats, I went ahead and painted both of them with my Pueblo colored matte acrylic paint from Folk Art, and I did have to do about 2 coats on each slat. Then because I wanted this to look a little bit more rustic, I went in with some sandpaper, and I first started sanding around the entire frame. And I was just gonna do the frame like a little bit distressed, but then I decided to go ahead and distress the rest of this piece. So I just sanded over the orange and the black slats as well. Since I'm not going to be using the beads, I went ahead and cut those off, but I am going to be using this 31 October little wooden piece. This I did pick up from Michael's last year when they had all of their Halloween decor out, and I never used it, so I decided to use it this year. And for the back of the piece, I'm painting that with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Then for the frame of this piece, I'm painting it with the color Pueblo from Folk Art. And then for the numbers and the word October, I went ahead and just used my black paint pen from Temu and colored all of those in. I'm then attaching this piece right in the center of my wooden slat piece, and I used hot glue to do that. This is what the sign looks like all finished. I think it is so cute and rustic. It fits perfect with all of my Halloween decor, and it was super easy to do. Next up is DIY number 3. For this one, I'm starting with this Farm Fresh piece from Dollar Tree. I really liked the shape of the sign, but I knew that I wanted to do a Halloween piece, so I went ahead and just took the top part off, and then I also removed the ribbon that was attached to the back of it as well. At first I thought I was going to use it, but then decided not to. I then flipped the sign over because this is going to be the front of my sign, and I went ahead and just painted it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. Once that color was dry, I then used the espresso color from Folk Art on a stencil brush, and I just dry brushed that color around all of the edges of the sign to try to make it look a little bit rustic and old. And then I took whatever was remaining on my brush and then just brushed that over the top, going in vertical strokes. For the words on my sign, I'm going to be using this Trick or Treat unfinished wood word pack. This came from Michael's this year, and I'm using my black paint pen to color in all of the letters. Before I added my letters, I did end up adding a little bit of my rich black paint around all of the edges and the top of my sign, just to give it a little bit more dimension and for it to match the letters a little bit better. And then I decided I was going to use this like black and cream color striped ribbon. This did come from Hobby Lobby. And I'm just cutting this down, but it is super thick, so I needed to cut the ribbon into strips. So I just cut off the edge of the ribbon and then just cut it into 2 smaller strips because this is going to go at the top of my sign. Now I'm going to be attaching those pieces of a ribbon. I flipped the sign over and just attached the ribbon to the back side using some hot glue right over where the original ribbon was. And then I flipped it back over to what is the front side of my sign. And then I'm just getting my words all centered on the front before I start using some hot glue to attach them. And thankfully I noticed before I glued them down, but I had the treat and trick word in the wrong spot. As you can see here, I almost put it down with hot glue, but then I realized at the last second that I had it in the wrong spot, but I did end up gluing them in the correct spot. So once I have them all glued down, then I decided I wanted to add some of these wooden pumpkin stickers. These ones are from Dollar Tree just this year, and I'm painting both of the pumpkins with the Pueblo color from Folk Art. I'm also going to be adding 4 of these unfinished wooden buttons. 2 of the buttons are larger than the other 2, and the 2 larger buttons I'm painting with that same Pueblo color, and then the 2 smaller buttons I'm using my rich black color. I'm then using hot glue to attach both of those pumpkins on each side of the word or. And then I'm gonna just start gluing my ribbon to the front of my sign. I just used hot glue in the spot where the original ribbon was to glue the ribbon down. And then I'm just gonna be hot gluing the orange colored buttons on top of the ribbon, and then on the front of the orange colored buttons, I'm then gluing those black buttons. I then just reattached the top dowel piece that was originally on the sign, and this is what the trick or treat sign looks like all finished. Another really easy project for this Halloween. Moving right along into DIY number 4. For this one, I'm going to be starting with this You're the Friend Everyone Wishes They Had sign from Hobby Lobby. This I got on clearance and I'm going to be using it for the base. And I'm just painting the entire piece with the rich black chalk paint. And then I'm going to be using 3 of these longer wooden dowels, and I'm going to be just using a paper towel to stain them with my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. I'm then going to be using a square of this fabric from Hobby Lobby. It's like cream with some brown specks. I'm also using one of these small foam balls from Dollar Tree, and I'm placing it right in the center of my square fabric. I'm then taking the wooden dowel and then just pressing it into the ball to create a hole. I'm then using some hot glue inside of that hole I just created and then placing the dowel back inside to secure it. I'm then just wrapping that fabric around the ball, and this is going to be the head of the little ghost that I'm creating. I'm then taking some jute twine and tying it around the ball and just making a knot. I'm then using some of this lace ribbon from Dollar Tree, and I'm wrapping it around where the jute is, right underneath my ghost head. Just cutting that down to size, and then I'm using some hot glue to secure the lace ribbon into place. Then for a little detail, I thought it would be cute to add one of these small unfinished wood buttons. I am gonna just be painting it with my rich black chalk paint, and then once it's all painted and dried, I just use some hot glue to attach it right in the center of my ribbon. Then to create the eyes for my ghost, I just used my black paint pen and just drew on 2 little eyes. Next, I'm using my drill to drill holes into that base piece that I painted earlier on in the video, and I just drilled 3 holes. I did 2 on each side and then 1 kind of more forward than the other 2 right in the center. I think I forgot to mention I did create 3 of those ghosts, and they are all on the 3 dowels that I stained, and I'm using hot glue inside of the holes to attach all 3 of the ghosts. The longer dowels I did on the 2 sides, and the shorter dowel I used on the front. I'm then using these unfinished wood letters from Hobby Lobby to spell out the word Boo, and I'm using that folk art wood tint in Walnut to stain all 3 of the letters. Then to make the letters pop a little bit, I'm using my white paint pen and just going around all of the edges of all 3 letters. I then use hot glue on the backside of each letter to attach them right in the center of my base piece. And then I decided to add some jute, and I just started hot gluing it along the back side of the base, and then I had it wrapped around the front of this piece right above the word Boo, and then I did a second piece of jute underneath the word Boo as well. Here is the piece all finished. This one turned out so good, and I love how it is neutral, so it can go with any type of Halloween decor. Next up is DIY number 5. For this one, I'm going to be starting with this green artificial apple, and this came in a pack of apples from Hobby Lobby. And I'm first just going to be removing the stem, and then I am going to be needing to drill a hole a little bit larger in the center of the apple so that I can place this stick inside. So here you can see I'm just using my drill to drill out a hole a little bit larger. I'm then painting my apple with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. Next, I'm going to be using some hot glue and just drizzling it down, coming out of the top of the pumpkin. In this case, I want it to look like poison is coming out of the apple. So here I'm just continuing to do that all the way around the top of the apple. I'm doing strands that are a little bit longer than others, and the reason I like using the hot glue is because it dries really quick than if you were to use a different kind of glue. Then because my hot glue went in the center, I did have to drill that out again so I could have a hole for my stem. I'm then going to be painting over all of the hot glue with my Folk Art Matte Acrylic Paint in the color Raw Sienna. I did have to do 2 different coats of this paint to make sure everything was covered up really nicely. You could always use like a red, a purple, or green for poison apples, but I wanted to keep mine nice and neutral. I did want to add a little tag on the stem, so I'm using this one here. This is Unfiltered Poison. I did purchase this one from Etsy, and I will have a link down to it in my description box. I just printed it off on a piece of a white cardstock, and then I'm just using some scissors to cut the shape out. I needed to create a really small hole at the top, so I'm just using one of my Cricut tools here since it has a really sharp point on the end, and I'm just using that to make a hole in my cardstock. I didn't want to use a hole punch because the ones I have are a little bit too large of a hole than for what I needed. The ribbon that I'm going to be using is this black and cream color ribbon from Hobby Lobby, and again, it is really thick and I wanted it to be a little thinner, so here I'm just cutting it down so that the strips are thin so that I can place them inside of my little cardstock hole. As you can see here, I'm just doing it where there's 1 strip of black and 1 strip of cream. I'm then placing that ribbon through the hole in the top of the cardstock that I created, and then I'm just going to be tying that around my stem. I should have did that before I glued my stem in, but I didn't. So here you can see I'm just using some hot glue to attach my wooden stem, and then once the stem was in, I then just used I tied my ribbon around the top of the stem, and I just created a knot and then just cut the ends of that ribbon down so that they're shorter. I ended up doing 2 of the apples, and this is what they look like all finished. It's a really easy Halloween project that you can make your own by using different colors. Now for DIY number 6. For this one, I'm starting with this unfinished wooden square frame piece from Dollar Tree. And the first thing I'm doing is using my Folk Art Wood Tint in Walnut to stain the entire frame and edges of this piece. Then for the inside of this piece, I'm painting it with the Waverly chalk paint in the color Ivory. I'm going to be using 5 of these unfinished wooden mini bats. These ones are from Dollar Tree. You can see 6 of them here, but I did end up only using 5 of them. And I'm just going to be using my black paint pen to color all of them black. I'm then getting them placed where I want them to be before I start attaching them. And then to attach all of the bats, I just use hot glue on the back side and then just place them back down where I had them. I'm using some of this black and cream ribbon from Hobby Lobby, which you've seen me use a lot in today's video, and I'm just cutting it into strips that are a little bit thinner, so where there's about 4 stripes on each piece, and I did cut 3 of them total and then just crisscrossed them, and then I'm just tying them all together with a piece of jute twine right in the middle. Then I'm cutting the ends of all of that ribbon into a V just to give them a little bit more detail. I'm then using some hot glue to attach those ribbon pieces on the top left-hand corner of my wood sign. I'm then going to be adding one of these medium-sized unfinished wood buttons. I'm just using some hot glue on the back side and attaching it right in the center of my ribbon. And then I'm also using a small unfinished wood button. But for this one, I'm using my black paint marker to color that black. And then I'm using some hot glue to attach it right in the center of the other button. This is the piece all finished. It's an easy piece that can be used on a tiered tray or tabletop, and it's also neutral, so it goes with all types of decor. Now for DIY number 7. For this one, I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood haunted houses that you can get from Dollar Tree. And at first I was going to do it black, but then I decided to go ahead and paint it a brighter color. And for this one, I'm using a Pueblo from Folk Art. So once I have it painted, I wanted to distress it a little bit. So I'm using my Folk Art paint in the color Espresso on a stencil brush, and I'm just going around all of the windows and the edges of the house to make it look really distressed and old. So once I went around the edges and the windows, I just took more of that paint and just put it pretty much wherever I thought it needed to look old and distressed. Then I'm going to be using these Home Sweet Haunted Home unfinished wood word cutouts. These are from Michaels this year, and I'm going to be painting all of the words with my folk art paint in the color Rich Black. Then to distress all of the words, I'm using Waverly's chalk paint in the color Ivory on a stencil brush and just dry brushing this color on top of all of the words. I have this scrap unfinished wood piece, and I'm going to be using this as the base piece for my house. I'm staining it with my Waverly wood tint in the color Walnut. I just applied the stain with a paintbrush and then just used a piece of paper towel to wipe off the excess stain. Next, I'm using hot glue on the back side of all of my wood words, and I'm attaching them right in the center of my house. I'm doing obviously the words home sweet above the word haunted and then home underneath the word haunted. I then need to attach my house to my wood base, but since the wood is pretty thin, I couldn't just glue that down. So here I'm just going to be using 2 of these like little wooden stem pieces. These are from Dollar Tree. I have a ton of them in my craft stash and thought that these would just be perfect since they were close by. So here you can see I'm just using hot glue to attach the stems to the back portion of the wood base, and then I'm going to be gluing the house right to the front of those wood pieces using some hot glue. For some detail pieces, I'm going to be using 2 of these unfinished wood bats from Joann's and then this mini one from Dollar Tree. I'm just going to be cutting off the tags, and then I'm painting all of them with that rich black chalk paint. Another detail piece, I'm using this unfinished wood tombstone from Michaels this year, and I'm painting it with my castle colored chalk paint. And then I'm also going to be using these other tombstones. These are from Michaels last year, and I'm painting them that same castle color. Then I started adding all of my little detail pieces using some hot glue. I attached the tombstones to the front of my wood piece in front of the house, and I just kind of did them like one in front of the other, and then I added my bats to the top peaks of my house. And then I did want to add a little bit more detail to the right side, so I took some of these black stems that I had and I'm just gluing them to the side of the house right on that wood base, and I just think that added a cute little detail. I ended up adding the last tombstone right in front of the little trees that I added, and then I'm using some of the Spanish moss from Dollar Tree, and I'm attaching it to the entire base of this piece using some hot glue. Here's my haunted house piece all finished. I really love how this one turned out. It is super easy, and it's great to add to a tabletop or even a mantle if you have one. Now moving into DIY number 8. For this one, I'm going to be using these 3 unfinished wooden bats, and these ones are from Joann Fabrics this year. And I'm using my black paint marker to paint all of the bats black. I'm then going to be using 3 of these wooden dowels. I have 2 of them that are one longer length, and then the third one I cut a little bit shorter. I'm using my folk art wood tint in walnut to stain all 3 of them. I'm also using this unfinished wood crate from Dollar Tree, and I'm using that same wood tint in walnut to stain the entire crate. Next, I'm going to be attaching those wooden dowels to the back side of all 3 of my bats using some hot glue. Then I'm going to be cutting down a piece of this floral foam from Dollar Tree so that I can place a few of the pieces inside of my wood crate. I'm then taking one of those dowels and making a hole in the floral foam on one of the sides, and then just placing some hot glue in that hole and placing the dowel back inside to make it a little bit more sturdy. I did the same thing for the next 3 dowels with my bats. Next, I'm placing some of this Spanish moss from Dollar Tree inside of the crate around all of the dowels. Then I'm using some of these unfinished wood tombstones from Michaels, and I'm painting both of the ones that I'm using here with the castle color from Folk Art. I wanted the edges to pop a little bit, so I'm using my white paint marker just to do a little bit of detail work around all of the edges. I'm then using hot glue to attach the Beware tombstone on the inside of the left side, and then I'm using more hot glue to attach the other tombstone on the right side inside of the crate. Then I'm going to be using some of these black sticks that I had in my craft stash, and I'm just going to be placing them inside of the Spanish moss and pressing them down into the floral foam. Here's the piece all finished. It was another easy Halloween project, and this one would be perfect for a tiered tray. Next is DIY number 9. For this one, I'm going to be using this cardboard witch's hat that I picked up this year from Joann Fabrics. First thing I'm going to be doing is painting the entire hat with my rich black chalk paint. Next, I'm going to be using some of this burlap ribbon from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just wrapping it around the top of the witch's hat and cutting it down to the size that I need. I'm then using hot glue to attach it around the top part of the hat, and I did have to make it go in a diagonal along the back side just to get it so it would stay flat around the hat. And then I just added another piece of that burlap fabric to cover up where it looked kind of messy. Then I'm going to be using some of this raffia from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to be hot gluing it starting around the back side of the hat just to hold it into place. I'm then having it come around the front of the hat, and then I'm crossing each section over top of each other, and then I'm just using hot glue to hold and secure those into place as well. I'm then going to be adding a piece of jute the same way that I did the raffia, just to give it a little bit more texture on the hat. And I did the same thing, like I said, just hot glued it around the top to secure it into place. I then trimmed up all of the raffia and jute strands to be a little bit shorter, and then I'm using one of these large unfinished wood buttons, and I'm just going to be painting it with that rich black chalk paint, and then once it's dry, I'm gluing it right in the center of where the raffia and the jute crisscross, and I'm using hot glue to attach it. And then I am going to be using an unfinished wood button that's a little bit smaller and gluing that right in the center. Then I wanted to add a little bit more detail, so I'm using my little Cricut tool here to create a hole in the very top of the hat. And then once I have the hole made, I'm going to be using some of this jewelry wire, and I'm just going to be wrapping that around my finger so that it is curly cued up. I'm then going to be placing one end of that wire inside of the hole in the top of the hat, and then I'm going to be using this wood spider that came from Dollar Tree this year, and I'm just going to be hot gluing it to the other end of the wire. Here's the witch's hat all finished. This would be perfect if you have more of a rustic style of Halloween decor, and it would even be a really cute added to the top of a ghost or skeleton head. Next is the final DIY today, DIY 10, and for this one I'm going to be using this foam skeleton head from Dollar Tree, and the first thing I'm doing is just painting the entire head with my rich black chalk paint. I'm then using Waverly's chalk paint in ivory on a smaller brush to just add a little bit of detail and shading to my skull, where all of the eye sockets are, the nose, and around the mouth. When I was painting the shading around the mouth, because it's foam, it ended up looking kind of messy. So if you're going to be doing this, you could use a different type of skull head and it might turn out a little bit better. I think the foam maybe wasn't the best option, but it's what I had to create this project. So once I have the head painted, I moved on to this candlestick, which I got from Goodwill for $1.99. I think it is really cute and it would be perfect for this project. So here I'm just painting it with that same rich black paint. Once everything is painted and dry, I just used some hot glue on the top of the candlestick and glued the skull right on top. This is the project all finished and put together. It's really easy and perfect if you're going to be having a Halloween party. I ended up adding the witch's hat from the last DIY on top, and I really like the look of this a lot better. For DIY number 1, I'm going to be starting with this unfinished wooden block square, and this one is from Michaels. The first thing I'm going to be doing to it is using my folk art wood tint in the color walnut and staining the entire piece. I'm also going to be using one of these unfinished wood square pieces from Dollar Tree, and over top of the square I'm going to be using one of these Halloween themed pieces of craft paper. This is from Joann Fabrics and it is from Park Lane, and the one I'm going to be using is this orange and black striped piece. I'm just setting my wood square over top of my paper just so I can see exactly where I need to cut to get it the correct size. I am leaving a little bit of the paper overlapping so that later on I can sand it down and get a precise cut around all of the edges. To attach my paper, I'm just using a paintbrush to apply the Mod Podge right on the wood, and then I'm just placing my paper over top and then just using my fingers to really press the paper down and get any bubbles out. And then I just let that Mod Podge dry before folding over the edges and then using some sandpaper again to just sand away the edges of the paper to get a really nice precise edge. I'm then going to be painting around all of the edges where you can see the unfinished wood with my folk art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. Another piece I'm going to be using for this project is this unfinished wood trick or treat cutout. This one is from Joann Fabrics last year, and I'm using that same Rich Black chalk paint to paint the entire piece. Then once the paint is dry, I'm just going to be using some sandpaper to sand over the entire piece to give it a little bit of a distressed look. Now I'm going to start putting everything together. I'm hot gluing my wood piece with the craft paper onto the stained wood block piece right in the center. And then once I have that attached, I'm going to be using hot glue to attach my trick or treat wooden circle right in the center of the piece with the craft paper. I was going to leave it just like this, but I thought the trick-or-treat words didn't really pop, so I'm just using a little bit of my ivory colored paint from Waverly to go around all of the edges of the letters just to make those pop a little bit more. This is what the piece looks like all finished. It was so easy to do, and I think it is super cute. It would be perfect to place on a tabletop or tiered tray. Next up is DIY number 2, and I'm going to be starting with this framed piece from Hobby Lobby. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is just painting the entire inside of the piece with my folk art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. I'm then going to be using 4 of these unfinished wood pumpkins, and these came in a pack from Michaels last year. I'm painting all 4 of the pumpkins with the folk art matte acrylic paint in the color Pueblo. Then for the stems, I'm using the folk art paint in the color Nutmeg. I then decided I wanted to go for kind of like a distressed look, so I used some sandpaper on the inside of the frame just to rough up that black color a little bit and have the white that was originally on it pop through a little bit. And then for the pumpkins that I painted, I also wanted those to look a little bit more faded and distressed, so I used some sandpaper on those as well just to give them that distressed look. Then I thought it was going to be a good idea to use my folk art wood tint in walnut around all of the edges of the frame, and then after I applied a little bit of it, I realized that was a mistake, but there was no going back because you really can't take away the stain. So I just had to finish staining the frame of the piece, and it was just a little bit too dark for my liking, but it is what it is. So then once I had that stain, I'm then just placing the pumpkins in the center of the frame to get them all placed where I wanted them to be, and then I used hot glue to attach each one of them down. Then to add a little detail, I'm going to be using a strand of raffia, and I'm just making a really simple small bow because I wanted to have a detail piece at the very bottom of the stem at the top of the pumpkin. So as you can see here, I'm just making a bow, and I did this for all 4 of the pumpkins, and then once I had the bow created, I just hot glued it right at the bottom of the stem. And this is the framed pumpkin piece all finished. It's a really easy and affordable project for this Halloween. Now for DIY number 3, I'm going to be taking one of these styrofoam mini balls from Dollar Tree and a sheet of foil. I place the ball in the center of the foil and then I'm going to be wrapping the foil around the ball and then just kind of forming what would be a ghost silhouette with the foil. So just kind of worked with it, and it doesn't have to be perfect, just whatever shape you think would look like a ghost. I'm then going to be using this air hardening clay. This one I did pick up from Hobby Lobby, but I know that Dollar Tree has molding clay as well. This is in the color white. And then I just used some of that clay and then I just pressed it down on some wax paper, and I'm using my rolling pin, kind of like if you were making rollout cookies. I'm just pressing the clay down so that it is pressed out to the thickness that I want my ghost to be. I'm then just peeling that clay up, and then I am going to be stretching it out just a tiny bit and then just letting it fall right over top of my foil piece. And then once it's kind of dropped on the way I want it to be, I'm just going around and forming the shape for my ghost. Then once I have the shape made, I'm using the end of a paintbrush to make my eyes and my mouth. You can use a straw. I've seen many people do that when they're making ghosts similar to this, but I didn't have one on hand, so I just used the end of my paintbrush. I didn't get the next part on camera, but once my clay was all dry, I just removed the foil from the inside of the ghost. This is what the ghost looks like all finished. I ended up just placing some of those little tea lights from Dollar Tree inside to have them light up, and I think that they turned out so cute, and it was such an easy project, and this would be a good project to do with kids as well. Moving right along into DIY number 4, for this one, I'm going to be using these 2 signs that came in a pack from Hobby Lobby, and they were on clearance for just under $4. I thought that they would be perfect to make a book stack. So for this, I'm also going to be using some of this like crinkly black craft paper, and this is from Hobby Lobby as well. I'm then gonna just be taking my paper and wrapping it around the side edge and just making a fold so I know exactly the size that I need. I'm then just gonna be cutting out the paper along that folded edge. I then used a paintbrush to apply some Mod Podge around that side edge of the sign, and then I just took my strip of paper and placed it right over top of that and just made sure that I pressed down pretty well so that the paper was nice and flat. Then once the Mod Podge dried, I used some sandpaper around all of those edges where the paper kind of overlapped just to give them a nice, clean, crisp edge. Next, for the second sign, I'm taking a second piece of this black craft paper and again, just wrapping it around this sign, kind of like you're wrapping a book cover on. So for this one, this is going to be the top of my book stack, so I needed this paper to cover the entire sign. So once I have it all folded and wrapped over the sign, I'm just going to be cutting off the excess paper on the bottom. The first sign that I did, where I only applied one strip to the front and back side, is going to be the bottom of the stack. That's why I didn't have to apply anything on the top. Next, you're going to see where I kind of messed up. You can see here I'm going to be cutting strips of this paper to go on the ends of the signs. Well, these are supposed to be like the book pages sides and not have any kind of craft paper on there. But here you can see I'm using my Mod Podge and applying the paper, but then afterward I realized, oh no, I wasn't supposed to put paper on those parts. So here I'm just going to be peeling the paper off the best that I can. The Mod Podge wasn't completely dry, which was good, but it still had like chunks of paper on it. So I ended up just having to use some sandpaper and scrape off what leftover paper that I could. Now that I got that dilemma out of the way, I can start applying my Mod Podge to the sign that I'm going to be using for the top of my book stack, where I wrapped the paper all the way around. Here I started with the edge, and I'm just going to be pressing the paper over the Mod Podge, and then once I have that part attached, I moved on to the top of the book. Same thing, just applied the Mod Podge to the top of the sign with a brush, and then just made sure that I pressed the paper down really, really well, and then continued for the next side doing the same steps. Then because I had a little bit of paper that hung over all of the edges, I just used some sandpaper to sand them away so that I would have a nice crisp edge. Then it was time to create my book stack by attaching the two signs together. I just used hot glue along the bottom of the top that I'm using for my book stack, and then just pressed it on the sign that I'm using for the bottom of the stack. Next, I'm going to be painting the sides of the signs or books with my ivory colored chalk paint from Waverly. Yes, you can still see some of the paper, but I'm just going to be painting over that and trying to make the sides of the book pages look a little bit vintage, so I just left a little bit of that on. Next, I'm using the color Burnt Umber from Folk Art, and I'm just going to be taking that on a small brush and going around all of the edges of the books, and then just kind of creating what would look like a distressing or like old book pages. So here I'm just, like I said, going around the edges between the two book stacks, and then just taking whatever leftover paint I had and then just going in horizontal strokes along the sides. I continued using that same burnt umber color between the two books on the front side, and then I just took that same color around all of the edges of the top of the book, the side of the book, along that black paper. And then because the paper has like those like crinkly parts, I thought it would be really cool if I added that color on top of all of the paper, because it was giving these books a really like old vintage vibe, and I just thought it looked really good. So here I'm just using the stencil brush to apply the paint. And then once that was done, I needed to do all of my letters. I'm doing words to spell out the word spells and potions. And these unfinished wood letters that I'm using are from Michaels, and I'm painting each one of the letters with my ivory colored chalk paint from Waverly. I'm then going to be using hot glue to attach all of my letters. I did the word spells on the top book, and then I did the word potions on the second book. I'm then going to be using a strip of this burlap ribbon from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to be wrapping it around the left side of my book stack opposite of my words. I just wrapped the ribbon around and then secured it underneath on the bottom using some hot glue. For a detail piece, I'm going to be using two of these unfinished wooden spiders. These I picked up from Michaels last year, and I'm going to be painting both of them with the rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. Then once the paint was dry, I wanted to give them a good sand just so that they would look a little bit distressed and vintage. I'm also going to be creating a mini witch's broom, and to do that I'm using one of these sticks. It's just like a mini stick, and I got this from Dollar Tree. And then I'm also going to be using some of these raffia strips. I took a bunch of them, placed some hot glue on them, and then just attached them to the bottom of my stick, and I did that around the entire stick. Then once I had that all on, I used another little piece of the raffia and tied it around all of the raffia pieces to create my broom, and then just trimmed up the bottom of those so that they weren't so long. To attach all of my little detail pieces, I'm going to be using hot glue. For the first spider, I ended up placing that on top of the book stack over top of the ribbon, and then I'm going to be attaching the witch's broom on top of the book stack. And then for the second spider, I did that on the front of the books over top of the ribbon. This is what they look like all finished. I love this one. Even though I had a few mistakes, I think it still ended up really cute. Next up is a DIY number 5. For this one, I'm going to be using this unfinished wooden coffin shape. This I recently picked up from Joann Fabrics and got it 50% off. And what's great about this is it already has the stand along the back side. Don't mind my crazy crafting mess. I'm a very messy crafter. So the first thing I did for the coffin shape is I wanted to stain all of the outside frame piece. So I just used my Folk Art wood tint in walnut to stain the frame. And then for the inside of the coffin, I used the color Rich Black from Folk Art. I wanted to use the words Home Sweet Haunted Home for this, so I pretty much used what I had in my stash. The home words are from Dollar Tree, and they come 2 in a pack, so I'm using 2 of those. The haunted word that I created using some unfinished wood letters, those ones are from Hobby Lobby, and then the word sweet that I'm creating with letters. Those letters I got from a Target dollar spot a while ago, probably a few years ago now, but they were still in my craft stash, so I'm just using what I had on hand. For the words and all of the unfinished wood letters, I'm using ivory from Waverly. Once the paint dried, I'm then just going to be placing them on front of the coffin shape to get them where I want them to be before I start using hot glue on the back side to attach them down. I had these unfinished wooden ghosts in my craft stash, and I thought that they would be perfect for this sign. I'm using 2 different ones, and they are from Michael's last year, and I'm painting all of them with my ivory colored paint from Waverly. Once the paint dried, I just started attaching the ghosts with hot glue, just kind of randomly around the sign. This is what the sign looks like all finished. I really love this one. I know that I say that about pretty much all of the projects, but I really love this one. I ended up placing it on my front porch, but just remember, if you are going to be placing it outside, make sure that you use a protective sealer so that it will last for years to come. Now for the 6th and final DIY today, I'm going to be starting with this large unfinished wooden pumpkin from Hobby Lobby. The first thing I'm going to be doing is painting the entire pumpkin besides the stem with my Pueblo matte acrylic paint from Folk Art. Then for the stem of the pumpkin, I'm painting it with Folk Art matte acrylic paint in Nutmeg. Another piece I'm going to be using for this project is this unfinished wood Happy Halloween cutout. This one is from Dollar Tree, and since it did have the little hanger holes at the top, I ended up just filling those with some wood filler, and then once the wood filler was dry, I just sanded it smooth. I'm then painting the entire piece with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. Then once the paint was dry, I wanted this to look a little bit distressed, so I sanded over the entire piece again, just to make it look kind of old and vintage. Next, I wanted to add a little bit of detail to my pumpkin, so I'm using some of my ivory colored paint from Waverly on a really small paintbrush, and I'm just kind of creating what would be like the grooves on a pumpkin, where you can see like how it kind of curves on the bottom of the pumpkin. I just went along those curves, and I did that on the left, the right, and then I did 2 in the middle. I also ended up going around all of the edges of the pumpkin with that same ivory color. Then I wanted to add even more detail, so I took some of my matte acrylic paint from Folk Art in the color Burnt Umber, and I went over all of the same areas that I painted with the ivory color. I then used hot glue to attach my Happy Halloween cutout right in the center of my pumpkin, and then I wanted to add a ribbon for my pumpkin, so I'm using some of this cream and black striped ribbon. This is from Hobby Lobby, and I'm cutting 2 strips of this ribbon, probably I would say about like 6 or 7 inches in length. I'm then going to be using this Happy Halloween ribbon from Dollar Tree, and I'm cutting 2 strips of that the same length as the striped. And then I'm also going to be using this like darker burlap ribbon with black on the sides. This I believe is from Walmart, and I'm cutting 2 strips of this ribbon as well. I'm then going to be creating my bow, and to do that, I'm starting by just stacking the ribbon. I did the burlap, then the Happy Halloween, then the striped, then the burlap, Happy Halloween, and striped, just creating an X and rotating between all of the color ribbon. I'm then gathering the ribbons in the middle and then using a piece of jute and just wrapping it around the center and then tying that off along the back side. I then wanted all of the ends of my ribbon to have a V cut. So here I'm just going through and making a V cut on all of the ends. Now I'm moving back onto the pumpkin. I wanted to add some Spanish moss right at the bottom of my stem. So I just used some hot glue to attach the Spanish moss from Dollar Tree. And then I also wanted to add a little bit of raffia. So here I just took a few strips of raffia, kind of twisted them together, and then I'm using hot glue to attach them right over top of that Spanish moss. And I did a strip of the raffia on the left and the right side, and then I just kind of like made them so that they stuck up like towards the stem. And then I just used some hot glue to attach my bow that I created right underneath that raffia. And here is my Happy Halloween large pumpkin sign all finished. I ended up placing this one on my porch as well, and I just love how it turned out. For the first DIY in today's video, I'm going to be printing off an image on this clear transparent paper. This is 8.5 by 11, and it is from the Recollections brand that I picked up from Michael's. I'm putting the paper into my printer the same as you would a regular piece of printer paper, and I am going to be just using the skull image. I ended up not using the bat that I printed off, but I'm going to show you how I got my image. I went to canva.com and just went over to custom size, and I'm doing an 8.5 by 11 since it's going to be the same size as the printer paper that I normally use. Now, canva.com does have a lot of free images that you can use. I pay for it monthly since I do use it a lot for work, but I just went over to elements on the left hand side and then typed in skull since it was a skull that I wanted to use for today's project, and it pulled up all of them in Canva, and then I just chose one that I liked. I saved it to my computer and then printed it off on that transparent paper that you had just seen. I then cut out my image, and you want to make sure that you're cutting as close to the image as possible because you don't want any of that paper to show around the sides of your image. And then at the very bottom of my skull, I am going to be leaving like a little tab so that I'm able to work with that later on. And this is what it should look like once it's all cut out. And then for this project, I'm also going to be using one of these glass ornaments from Hobby Lobby. This one came in a 4-pack, and then I'm just removing the top of the ornament and then rolling up my skull a little bit so that I can place it inside of the ornament. And then this is why it's really important to have that little long tab at the bottom. It's because you're going to want to hold on to it and then be able to hot glue it to the very bottom hole of the ornament. I'm also going to be using this wood candlestick from Hobby Lobby, and it is from the Woodpile brand. I removed the tag on the bottom, and then I painted the entire candlestick with my folk art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. And then once that was dry, I wanted to give it a little bit of a distressed, like dirty look. So I took my folk art chalk paint in the color Raw Sienna, and I just dry brushed that around all of the little grooves on the candlestick. I wanted to do a shorter candlestick as well. This one is also from Hobby Lobby, and I believe it comes in a 4-pack. And I did the same thing with this one. I painted it with that rich black chalk paint, and then I took that same raw sienna color and distressed it. Then it was time to put everything together. I put hot glue inside of the candlestick and then just placed my glass ornament on top of that to attach it. And this is what they look like all finished. It was such an easy and inexpensive project, and I will definitely be adding these to my Halloween decor this year. Now for DIY number 2. For this project, I'm using one of these unfinished wood square plaques from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting on my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut and then just wiping away the excess tint with an old rag. And then for this one, I'm also going to be using a scrap piece of wood that's about 10 inches in length, and I'm doing the same thing, just painting on the wood tint and then wiping away the excess. I'm also going to be using 4 of these wooden craft sticks that have the point on the end. These ones are from Joann Fabrics from the brand Park Lane. And then for all 4 of them, I'm painting them with my rich black colored chalk paint from Folk Art. Then for the last piece of wood I'm going to be using on this project, it's just this wood plank, and it is 5.5 by 3.5 inches. And I first started wanting to do it this orange color and then changed my mind and painted over it with that same rich black color I used on the other wood pieces. After all of the paint was dry on everything that I painted, I wanted to give them a little bit of a distressed look. So I took my Castle Color chalk paint from Folk Art and I dry brushed that on all of these little arrows, and then I also did that on the same wood plank piece that I also painted with black. And then after I did the Castle Color, I took the color Raw Sienna and dry brushed that over top as well, just to give it more of like a dirty, spooky look. Next, I'm going to be transferring this Happy Halloween design that I created on my Cricut right in the center of my wood plank piece. I will have all of the fonts and everything I'm using down in the description box. I also transferred this Salem saying on one of the little arrows, this Sleepy Hollow saying, and then I also did one that says Elm Street, and then another one that says Haddonfield. And like I said, I will have all of the fonts linked down in the description box in case you wanted to recreate these. Then it was time to start attaching everything together. I placed hot glue right in the center of my square wood plank piece and then just attached that longer wood piece that I had stained. And then I always like to place everything down where I think I'm going to want it before I start hot gluing it down. So here I just did that with all of my little arrows and my wood plank. And then once I had it all situated the way I wanted it to be, I hot glued each piece down. I did want to add some details, so here I just attached some jute along the back side of the sign, and then I just went around in several different directions, just overlapping the jute. I thought this just looked really Halloweenish and messy, and then I just attached the end of the jute along the back side of the sign. And then I'm also going to use this little wooden unfinished bat. This did come from a wood icon pack from Michael's that I picked up this year, and I just painted that with the rich black color, and then once that was dry, I dry brushed the colored plaster from Waverly around all of the edges of the bat so that it would pop a little bit more. Another detail piece I'm going to be using is this wood cross. This did come in a pack of crosses from Hobby Lobby, and I just painted it a really dark charcoal gray color. I mixed some white paint with black to create the color, and then once the paint was dry, I'm adding this small little bat. This did come from Dollar Tree, and it was originally on a little cupcake like topper stick, and I just took the stick off, and then I'm hot gluing that bat on the top of my cross. I'm now going to be removing some of these little limbs off of my skeleton. You can get these at Dollar Tree or Dollar General, several of them for like $1. I'm just twisting his arms around so that they pop off, and then I did want to change the color a little bit, so I'm taking the Waverly chalk paint and the colored plaster and just kind of dry brushing it over top of both of his skeleton arms. And then once that paint was dry, I took some of my Java colored paint and just dry brushed that over the white so that I can really add some dimension and make these skeleton arms look really old and dirty. Then it was time to start adding everything. I attached the cross with some hot glue at the very bottom right hand side of the wood plank, and then I attached Spanish moss all around the cross using some hot glue once again. And then over top of the moss in the center, I made an X with my skeleton arms and just attached those. And then I did end up adding this small little skeleton head or skull that I picked up from Joann Fabrics. I think it was really cute, and I just added that right to the center in between the skeleton arms. Then I added the bat that I painted at the very top left-hand corner of my sign, but I put some Spanish moss underneath that just to add a little bit more detail. And this is what the sign looks like all finished. It was super easy, and I just love how this one turned out. This might be one of my favorites from today's video. Now moving right along into DIY number 3. For this project, I'm starting out with a scrap wood piece that's 12 inches by 3.5 inches, and I'm painting on my folk art wood tint in the color walnut and then just wiping away the excess. You guys will see me use this in a lot of today's projects. Then I'm using one of the wood planks from Dollar Tree, and I'm doing the same thing, just staining this piece, and it is 7 inches by 3 inches. For this project, I'm using 4 dowel rods. 2 of them I have cut down to 10.5 inches, and then the other 2 I'm going to be using are 12 inches in length. Then once all of my wood tint has dried, I'm going to start attaching everything together. Next, I'm attaching my 2 10.5 inch dowels on each side of my bottom wood piece right in the center, and to attach them, I'm using hot glue. I'm using 3 of these mini cauldrons from Dollar Tree. You can get them in a pack of 4, but I'm using 3 of them for my project today. And then I took a piece of jute and I'm wrapping it around the handle on my cauldron, and I did this to all 3 of them so that I'm able to hang them on my wood dowel. I then took all 3 of my cauldrons and then just tied them around my 12-inch dowel. I'm then going to be attaching this dowel onto the 2 10.5 inch dowels that I've already attached to my bottom piece, and I'm using hot glue to do this. And then once that's attached, I thought it would be really cute to add some of this jute detail around the edges or the ends of the dowel rods. So I just randomly tied the jute around, just tied it in a knot on the back side and cut off the jute ends. I then did the exact same thing on the other side. And then I'm going to be taking this image that I created with my Cricut and I'm transferring it right in the center of my wood plank. I will have exactly how I created it and what fonts and stuff I used linked down in my description box. But once I had that all transferred onto my plank, I then attached the fourth dowel at the very top of the other two dowels, like you can see me doing here, and I just use hot glue again to attach them. Then I'm taking my wood plank with my decal on it and I hot glued that on the very top dowel that I just attached. I then added the same jute detail around the ends of my dowels at the very top. I just wrapped the jute around, tied it in a knot, and then cut off the ends along the back side. Now I'm going to be getting all of my little detail pieces ready. I'm using 6 of these plastic bones. These ones are from Dollar Tree, and you could leave them the color that they are already, but I wanted to add a little bit more color to them, so I added some of my Waverly chalk paint and plaster, and then over top of the plaster I used some of my Java chalk paint just to give them more of that dirty, rustic, real bone type look. Not that they look real, but I just like the look of them. And then once all of the bones were painted, I just placed 2 of them crisscrossing each other in each one of my cauldrons. Underneath each one of my cauldrons, I'm adding 3 little stem pieces. These ones are from Dollar Tree, and I'm just making them look kind of like there's a campfire underneath all of the cauldrons, and I hot glued them crisscrossing each other right on that bottom wood piece. I'm also using one of these mini hay bales from Dollar Tree, and I sawed it in half. As you can see, it is just like a wood block. So once I have it cut in half, I then have 2 smaller pieces. I'm taking the little bit larger one that I cut and I'm hot gluing that first right in front of one of my dowels on the side, and then I'm taking the smaller hay piece and hot gluing that right over top. I'm then using one of these mini skulls. Again, I got a pack of these from Joann Fabrics, and I'm hot gluing the skull on the very top hay bale, and then on the bottom hay bale, I'm hot gluing one of these mini bats from Dollar Tree. I then did the exact same thing with another mini hay bale skull and bat on the other side. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. I love the look of this one. It was super fun to create. And again, I will have the decal that I created on my Cricut linked down in the description box. Next is the 4th DIY in today's video, and I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood shadow boxes. This is from Michaels, and you can get these for 99 cents. I'm then going to be painting the entire piece with my folk art chalk paint in the color Rich Black, and I only had to do 1 coat of this paint. And again, I did the entire thing. I even did the inside of the shadow box this color as well. I'm using one of these unfinished wood witch icons. This did come in a pack of a bunch of different Halloween unfinished wood pieces from Michaels, and I did just recently pick that up this year. And I painted that with that same rich black color. And then I'm using one of these round unfinished wood pieces. I'm not sure where I got this, but you can pretty much get these at any craft store. And I'm painting it with my Waverly paint in the color Plaster. Then I'm going to be taking some sandpaper to the shadow box, and I'm just going to be distressing it a little bit to give it more of a vintage look. And I did the same thing to the witch icon. I sanded over her a little bit just to give her a little bit of that same vintage look. Next, I used hot glue to attach the wood circle right in the center of my shadow box, and then I used hot glue again to attach the witch right in the center of my wood circle. You could be done with the project without adding anything else, but you guys know me, I love adding lots of detail. So here I'm taking this fence that I picked up from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just seeing exactly how many of these little posts that I would need to go across the front of my shadow box. And then I'm just cutting it down a little bit. Once I have it all cut off the length that I need, I'm then taking my scissors and I'm just cutting through the fence post pretty much like right in the center, because I did need them to be a little bit shorter, and then I'm just removing them from the wires because I'm not using the wire for this project. So I continued to do that until I had all of my fence posts cut out. And then I took some of my Java colored chalk paint and just dry brushed this color over every single one of the posts that I'm going to be using to give them a distressed look. And it probably would have been a little bit easier if I would have done this after I attached the posts, but I didn't. So now here you can see me hot gluing each one of the posts along the bottom of the shadow box. And I did do each post like going in a different direction so that it looks like kind of broken and just really messy. And then as you can tell, some of the posts were a little bit longer and some of them were a little bit shorter, and I did purposely cut them like that, again, just to have more of like a messy Halloween look. And then in between each one of my posts, I'm hot gluing a little bit of Spanish moss. It does get a little bit messy, but I did just end up trimming it down a little bit at the end. For the last little detail in this project, I'm adding some of these alphabet beads to spell out the word wicked, and I'm just stringing them onto a piece of jute. And once I have them all strung on, I'm then going to be wrapping them around the top left-hand corner of my shadow box, and then just using some hot glue to secure the jute ends. And here is my project all finished. It was a really easy and inexpensive project that would go with any type of Halloween decor. Now moving right on into DIY number 5. For this one, I'm using this jack-o'-lantern pumpkin that I picked up from Lowe's. It was $9.95. And today I'm going to be recreating the Pottery Barn pumpkin dupe. If you guys have TikTok and Instagram, you've probably seen it all over the place. Basically what it is you are just recreating like a terracotta look pumpkin. So I took the colors Pueblo from Folk Art and also Raw Sienna, and I mixed those two colors together, and then I'm painting that on my entire pumpkin, even the stem, to give it more of that like terracotta pumpkin look, not as bright orange. So once I have this color painted on my entire pumpkin, like I said, I'm gonna let my pumpkin dry just a tiny bit, but your pumpkin's still gonna be wet. And then I'm taking baking soda and I'm sprinkling it all over my pumpkin. And then I'm taking an old chip brush and I'm just very lightly dusting that baking soda over all of the wet paint. You want to be really careful not to do too much pressure on your paint. Now, I've seen a lot of tutorials where people will mix the actual baking soda into their paint before they paint it on their pumpkin, but I wanted to have a little bit of a smoother look on my pumpkin, so I did it this way. This is what the pumpkin looks like all finished. I think it turned out super cute. I love the look of it, and I even tried it on one of these little mini Dollar Tree pumpkins, and I think it turned out really nice as well. Next is DIY number 6, and I'm going to be creating a mini Halloween scene. For this one, I'm starting with a scrap piece of wood that's 11 inches by 5 inches, and I'm using my favorite folk art wood tint in the color walnut to stain this piece of wood. I like to paint on the stain, then wipe away the excess. I'm also using one of these unfinished wood haunted houses from Dollar Tree, and then one of these scrap piece of wood strips that I got from Hobby Lobby. And here I'm just taking the wood strip and I'm measuring the length of the roof on my haunted house. And this wood is really easy to cut. I believe it's a balsa wood. What I did was just mark where I needed to cut, and then I just cut it with one of these utility knives, and I continued to do that over and over for all of my little roof pieces. And some of the ends of the balsa wood were really jagged, which is exactly what I wanted because this is supposed to be a spooky haunted house. I'm using another one of these wood strips to frame the outside edges of the door on the haunted house. Again, just kind of like measured around the door where each piece of wood needs to be cut, and then just cut the piece of wood with my utility knife. Then I'm using a few of these small popsicle sticks. These are from Dollar Tree, and I'm just, again, measuring to go around the windows. This is going to give me the look of shutters on each side of all of my windows. So I just marked where I needed to cut, and then I used my utility knife to score a few times on the popsicle stick, and then I could just bend it and break each end off. And I continued to do it over and over again until I had all of my popsicle sticks cut so that I have shutters for each side of my window on my house. Then once I had all of my wood pieces cut for my roof and my shutters and the trim around my door, I painted each one of those pieces with my folk art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. And then I painted my entire house with my folk art chalk paint in the color Castle. And then once all of the paint was dry, I started attaching all of my wood trim pieces. I hot glued them all on, all of the pieces to go around the door, my shutters for my windows, and then all of the roof pieces that I have cut. For this project, I'm going to be adding a lot of little detail pieces, so I'm just warning you. This is going to be one of them. I took 2 of those scrap popsicle sticks that I had cut off of, and I'm actually going to be creating a sign with it. So I'm painting both of the popsicle stick pieces with my plaster color chalk paint, and then using a small piece of wood to attach the 2 popsicle sticks together. And then once the paint was dry, I'm then using this decal that I created on my Cricut that says beware, and I'm just transferring it onto those scrap wood pieces. Then once it's all transferred, I'm then hot gluing this mini sign in a diagonal over top of my door on my house. I'm then making another little sign. This one I also created on my Cricut that says keep out. I will have those linked down in my description box so that in case you guys wanted to use them, you'd be able to cut them out as well. I painted another one of my little popsicle sticks and transferred the keep out words onto the wood. And then I hot glued that in a diagonal over the round window on the front of the house. I then wanted to add some distressing on the entire house, so I used a fan brush with a little bit of my plaster color paint from Waverly, and I dry brushed that on the entire house just to give it like an old falling down kind of house look. And then I also took some of my Java colored chalk paint and dry brushed that over top of the beware keep out sign, and then on the front of the house as well. Next, I'm going to be cutting down some of these mini wood pieces. These came in an assortment wood pack that I got from Dollar Tree a long time ago, and I've just had them forever, and I'm finally putting them to use today. I cut them down so that they would fit to go across the windows on my house, and some of the edges on the wood when I cut them were really jagged looking, which was perfect because that's exactly what I wanted for this project. So once I have the wood pieces cut down, I'm then using that same walnut wood tint to stain all of the pieces. I'm then going to be hot gluing each one of these wood pieces over top of all of my windows in a diagonal so that it looks like boarded up windows on the front of my house. I'm also going to be using this mini wooden ladder. This, I believe, came from the wood dollhouse section at Hobby Lobby, and I've had it in my stash forever, and I thought, what better project to use it on than this one today? So I'm just staining my ladder with that same walnut wood tint, and then I'm going to be using these tombstones. These ones did come from Michael's this year, and then the wood cross on the side, that one is from Hobby Lobby. And I painted all of them with this castle colored chalk paint. And then the 2 little flat wood pieces, those are just from a scrap wood piece pack, and those are going to be the bases for my 2 tombstones, and I'm painting those with that same castle colored paint. After the paint has dried, I'm then hot gluing the tombstones onto those flat wood pieces. And I did end up adding some distressing to my tombstones. I took the rich black colored paint and then just really lightly dry brushed that on the tombstones to give them more of a spooky look. I really wanted to add a mini directional sign, so for this one I'm going to be using this little fence that came from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just pulling the fence posts off of the wood pieces on the back. And then for one of the pieces I did cut with my utility knife just a little point off, and then I did cut the little pieces of wood down shorter so that they would be extra mini for my sign. I then painted all of those pieces with the Waverly paint and plaster. Then once the paint was all dry, I then used a pen to write the words haunted house, asylum, and then cemetery on all three of the pieces that have the little arrows on them. And then I just hot glued those little arrows on the straight piece of wood without the little arrow on the end of it and created a mini directional sign. Now it's finally time to start attaching everything. I hot glued my house on the left side of the stained piece of wood, and then I also hot glued my little mini ladder right underneath the left side window on the house. I placed all of my tombstones where I wanted them to be, and then I also am going to be adding this wood tree. This did come from a Target wreath pack, and I just thought that this tree would look perfect on this Halloween scene, so I hot glued that tree right on the right side of the house, and then I hot glued each one of my tombstones down. And then I'm attaching my mini directional sign that I created at the front right hand side of my wood piece. Now I'm going to be adding some even more detailed pieces. I'm taking one of these little people-shaped wood pieces. This one is from the Park Lane brand at Joann Fabrics. And then I'm also taking some spider web pieces. I'm just kind of rolling them up in my hand a little bit, and then I'm wrapping it around the little wood person randomly over and over again to form a mummy. And then for the eyes, I'm just painting two little black dots on the head of the mummy. I'm also going to be using these mini jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. These are from Dollar Tree. They came on a little wood stick, and then I just took the stick off, and I'm leaving the pumpkins that orange color, but I am going to distress them a little bit with the Java colored chalk paint from Folk Art, and I did end up using 4 of these little pumpkins for this project. I did end up using the little stick that the pumpkin originally came on. I cut it down really small and then hot glued the little stick at the top of the pumpkin to create a stem, and then I did paint the stem with my Java colored chalk paint. This first pumpkin I'm hot gluing on the left side of the house, and then on the right side of the house I am hot gluing my little mummy guy. And then I am going to be hot gluing a bunch of Spanish moss all over the entire wood bottom piece. This is just going to give me that dead grass look throughout my cemetery. Next, I'm going to be taking the arms off of this little mini skeleton. This one did come from Dollar Tree. I just wrapped the arms around several times until the arms popped off, and then to make them a little bit shorter, I just cut the arms with my pliers. I did want the bones on the arms to look a little bit more white, so I used my plaster color paint to paint them all, and I did use 4 of them for this project. Once the paint was all dry, I then hot glued the arms and the rest of the bones around all of the tombstones on my project. I'm also going to be adding one of these mini bats from Dollar Tree. This bat did come on one of these little sticks like the pumpkin did, but I have already removed the stick, and now I'm going to be hot gluing that bat at the very top of my directional sign. You saw me use some of this fencing from Hobby Lobby in one of my projects today. Well, I'm going to be using it again for this project. So I'm going to be leaving the fence on the wires, but here I just need to see exactly where I need to cut for the length that I'm going to be using for my little wooden bridge walkway that leads up to the front of the house. So I removed the fence posts where I need to cut, and then I just used my pliers to cut the wires. I'm then just going to be folding those wires around the back side of the fence post, and then I'm going to be cutting off all of the little triangles on the fence post, because obviously I'm not going to be using it as fence posts. I just want it to be like a little wooden bridge, so I'm using my utility knife to cut off all of the triangle shape. Next, I'm just using some hot glue to attach the fence post to the very front of the house, so it looks like a wooden bridge leading up to the door of the house. And then I'm just going to be hot gluing some of these mini pumpkins that you saw me paint earlier with some hot glue next to my tombstones. And I guess I said I used 4 of them. I guess I only used 3 pumpkins for this project today. To add a little bit of distressing to my wood fence post pieces, I'm using my Java colored paint and I'm just dry brushing that right on. And then this is the last little detail piece I'm going to be adding. This is a wooden ghost. This did come from Michael's this year, and I just painted it with my plaster colored paint, and then once it was dry, I hot glued it on the top right hand side of my haunted house. This is what the project looks like all finished. I think it is super cute. I had so much fun creating it. I know there's a lot of little detail pieces and it does take a little while to create it, but I know that I will be using it for years to come, and I know that my son also enjoys this piece as well. Next is DIY number 7. For this one, I'm going to be transforming this Christmas wreath that I picked up from the Salvation Army. I paid $3.99 for it, and I'm just going to be removing all of the Christmas berries, the greenery, and all of the pine cones. And what's great about this is I can keep all of the greenery and embellishments from this wreath for when I make Christmas DIYs. Now that I have all of the Christmas stuff removed, I'm going to be using this Rust-Oleum matte spray paint in Farmhouse Black, and I am just giving this twig wreath a good spray, and I'm doing it on the front, and then once that's dried, I did the back as well. And then I brought it back inside, and I'm just adding some of these spider webs that I picked up from Dollar Tree. I'm just stringing them along the twigs until I thought it looked nice, and then I'm going to be using this Happy Halloween wood cutout. This one is from Michael's this year, and I started by just painting this entire wood cutout with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I'm then hand painting some orange colored stripes on my words Happy Halloween, and the color that I'm using is Pueblo from Folk Art, and it is a matte acrylic paint. Then I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wooden bats. This one is from Michael's, and then I'm just painting it with the rich black colored paint. And then I'm attaching the bat to the top left hand corner of the H on the word happy. Then I'm taking some black ribbon and I'm hot gluing it to the back of the bat, and then also the back of the letter Y for happy. I'm then taking the ribbon and wrapping it around the back side of the wreath and then back up to the front side again so that I can have the Happy Halloween words attached in the center of the wreath. And then I just used hot glue to attach the ribbon to the actual wreath. And this is what the wreath looks like all finished. It was a really easy and inexpensive Halloween decor project. Definitely keep your eye out for wreaths when you're at like thrift stores, because you can always find some really great deals, and then you can always transform the wreaths into something that fits with your current decor. Moving on into DIY number 8. For this project, I'm using this unfinished wood palette that came from a store called Dollar Treasure that we have here in Michigan. And I'm using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut to stain the entire palette. I'm also going to be using this tomb shape wooden cutout. This is from the Place and Time brand at Joann Fabrics, and I made a charcoal color paint to paint on this tombstone. I just mixed some black and white paint, and then I'm also going to be using this wood cutout. This is a tombstone that came in a pack of wooden Halloween icons from Michael's, and I painted that one with the castle colored chalk paint, and then I hot glued that tombstone with the cross on top of the larger tombstone. And then I'm going to be using these unfinished wood letters to spell out the words, or not the word really, it's just gonna say RIP on the top of the tombstone. And I am attaching those letters at the very top of the tombstone. As you can see here, I did originally paint them with a castle colored chalk paint, but I do end up going back through and just painting the plaster color over top because I think it makes the letters pop a little bit more. I'm then using some hot glue to attach the tombstone on the back of the palette, and then I'm going to be using some of these skeleton hands that I recently picked up from Michael's, and I'm hot gluing one of them on the right front side of the palette, and then I'm going to be using another one, and I'm just hot gluing that on the left back side of the palette. I'm then attaching some Spanish moss all around the tombstone and the hands, and I'm just attaching it using some hot glue. For one little last detail, I'm using 3 of these painted black sticks, and I'm just hot gluing them on the right side of the tombstone to kind of look like a mini tree. And this is what the project looks like all finished. It was another very easy Halloween project, and this is even small enough that you could fit it on a tiered tray or a shelf. Now for DIY number 9. This next project is super easy. I'm taking this piece that I recently picked up from the Target dollar spot, and it is a little bit too shiny for my liking on the bottom part, so I did take it outside and I'm spray painting it with my Rust-Oleum matte spray paint in Farmhouse Black. Then I'm taking 2 of these skeletons from Michael's, and I'm first removing the little hangers that are on the top of the skeleton, and then I'm taking the first skeleton and hot gluing it right to the center of my little stand piece here, and then I'm taking the second skeleton and hot gluing that on top of the bottom skeleton, kind of like at a side angle. I then thought it would be really cool to add some of these little spider webs that I got from Dollar Tree. I'm just kind of moving them around, spreading them out, and then using some hot glue to keep the spider webs in place. And then once I have all of the spider webs in place, I'm gonna start adding some Spanish moss around the bottom of the skull and then around the top skull in between the 2. You could skip this next step if you're not really into lights, but I thought it would be really cute to add these spider lights that I got from Dollar Tree. They just take 2 AA batteries, and I put the battery pack on the back side of the skulls, and then I wrapped the little spiders around the bottom of the skull and then up across the top skull and then back down again. And this is what the project looks like all finished. It was super easy to do and would be perfect if you're going to be having a Halloween party as a really inexpensive piece that you can create for tabletop decor. Now for the 10th and final DIY in today's video, I'm using this glass like fishbowl type jar from Dollar Tree, and I started by taking my rich black chalk paint on a chip brush, and I started just dabbing it pretty randomly on the inside of the jar, and then I took a piece of saran wrap, bunched it up, and then just started pressing that paint in, and just kind of like if you were to do like sponge painting on a wall, I'm doing that with saran wrap on the inside of this glass jar. And I just randomly, like I said, I did the black colored paint, and then once the black colored paint was dry, I then added some blue and pink colors, and then did the same thing with the saran wrap, just kind of like sponge painted it on the inside. And then once that was all finished on the inside, I set that aside to fully dry, and then I took one of these little candlestick holders. This one is from Dollar Tree. I had originally painted it this white color, but I never used it. So today I'm repainting it the rich black color. And then I'm also going to be using one of these wooden rounds from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting this one with that same rich black color. After the paint was all dry, I'm then hot gluing the wood round piece on top of my candlestick, and then I'm hot gluing my jar on top of the wood round. I then took a piece of jute, wrapped it around the bottom of the jar a few times, tied that in a knot, and then just cut off the long jute ends. I'm then going to be using these black roses. These ones are from Dollar Tree. I'm using 4 of them, and I'm hot gluing all 4 of them on the very top of my glass jar. Since the glass jar isn't a full like round circle, it still has that like straight edge on the bottom. I wanted to cover that up a little bit because this is supposed to be like a magic ball. So I just added these embellishments on the top to kind of just cover up the flat part of the jar. And as you can see here, I'm just adding some Spanish moss around all of the roses. And then I did end up adding this mini skull from Joann Fabrics right in the center of all of the roses. And then for the very last step, I'm adding another one of those skulls right at the front of my jar over top of the jute strings. And here is my magic crystal ball all finished. It was a super easy project. Most of the materials came from Dollar Tree, so it's also really inexpensive to make as well. And that wraps it up for all 26 of my favorite Halloween decor DIYs. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it. If you are not subscribed, I hope that you will consider subscribing. And please be sure to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of my future videos. And I would love to know in the comments down below which project from today was your favorite. Thank you so much for watching.